8 signs you have an extremely rare personality. But what if everything you've been told about being too much, too emotional, too intense, too complex isn't a flaw at all? What if it's a signal that something extraordinary lies within you? Something that most people will never understand, let alone experience. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll see exactly why Carl Jung believed that the very traits society criticizes might actually be the key to your deepest, most meaningful purpose. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what if who you truly are doesn't align with what the world expects? What if your intensity, your sensitivity, your relentless craving for depth and meaning are not things to be corrected, but signals of a rare and powerful psychological makeup? Have you ever been told you're too much, too sensitive, too deep for your own good? If so, you're not alone, and it's not a coincidence. According to Jung's groundbreaking research into personality types, there are individuals who operate with what he called differentiated consciousness, a heightened form of perception and experience that goes beyond the surface-level understanding of everyday life. What makes this fascinating is that many people with this rare consciousness spend years, if not decades, believing that there's something wrong with them. They carry a quiet, invisible burden, but in truth they are functioning at a level of psychological sophistication that is far less common than they realize. But here's the catch, and it's a big one, and I'll explain exactly what it is in just a moment. Today, we're going to explore 8 unmistakable signs that you might possess this rare personality type. If these signs resonate with you, they won't just help you make sense of your past, they could completely transform the way you see your future. But before we begin, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like your emotional reactions seem out of proportion to what others are experiencing? Have people told you to calm down when you were simply speaking your truth? There's a reason for this that Jung uncovered, and it's not what you think. Sign 1. You experience emotional depth that others can't comprehend. Jung discovered something remarkable about emotional intensity. He found that certain individuals don't simply feel emotions, they inhabit them. They live through them as if being moved by waves, what he referred to as affect-toned complexes, emotional experiences so deeply tied to memory, thought, and identity that they shape a person's entire inner world. To put it simply, you don't just have emotions. Emotions move through you, like currents carving canyons into stone. They shape how you see, speak, and understand the world. And here's the crucial insight Jung brought to light. This isn't instability. It's not a disorder. It's emotional intelligence at an advanced level. So why does society so often label it as overreaction? Because most people have been conditioned to suppress emotion, to keep their inner world hidden. When you feel deeply, you don't fit that mode, and that makes others uncomfortable. They misunderstand your emotional radar as sensitivity, when in fact, it's a kind of internal sonar picking up truths others can't detect. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." In that same spirit, your emotional intensity is not something to hide. It's a gift, a built-in system of intuitive perception. You notice when a smile doesn't reach someone's eyes. You feel the awkward tension in a conversation long before anyone admits something is wrong. You're wired for emotional subtext, not surface-level interactions. But here's where things get more complicated, and where people with this rare depth often fall into a dangerous trap. Jung identified a pattern, a form of inner conflict, that emotionally intense individuals often struggle with. The world teaches you to mute your intensity, to water yourself down, to be reasonable, to stop making everything so emotional. But here's what Jung understood that society misses. When you suppress this kind of emotional depth, you don't become more balanced, you become fragmented. You begin to experience what Jung called a psychological splitting. One part of you holds the truth, your inner knowing, while another part tries to conform, and that conflict, it exhausts you. It wears you down. It's why you might feel drained just trying to act like someone you're not. This is why you've probably felt exhausted, trying to be someone you're not. But what if I told you that Jung discovered a way to transform this emotional intensity from a burden into your greatest strength? This idea might sound far-fetched at first. How could something that once left you feeling misunderstood or overwhelmed possibly be a gift? But Jung's insight into this transformation is one of his most profound contributions, and I'll reveal that technique in sign number 6. Let's now explore sign 2. You question everything with unrelenting curiosity. According to Carl Jung, the majority of people live what he described as unconscious lives. They move through the world on autopilot, accepting social conditioning, norms, and routines without ever pausing to question why. But you can't help yourself. You dig, you probe, you search for meaning beneath the surface. Jung would have immediately recognized you as someone with an active thinking function, a rare psychological trait that rejects superficial answers. It's not that you're trying to be difficult or contrarian, it's that your mind naturally demands truth, not illusions. And this, Jung emphasized, is a hallmark of psychological honesty. But there's a cost that comes with such honesty, and many don't recognize it until much later in life. You don't just ask what is happening, you ask why. Why do people stay in relationships that drain them? Why do we follow systems that clearly no longer serve us? Why do we pretend that small talk counts as meaningful connection? Your mind refuses to settle for appearances. It seeks the architecture beneath the mask, the invisible forces that shape choices, beliefs, and patterns. Jung referred to this rare ability as the transcendent function. The mental capacity to see beyond present circumstances and imagine what lies just out of reach. While others accept things as they are, you are already envisioning how things could be, how they could be more meaningful, more just, more aligned with truth. But here lies the paradox that Jung identified. The clearer your vision becomes, the lonelier the path can feel. Why is that? Because your questions, no matter how sincere, threaten other people's illusions. When you push for truth, you're not just asking questions. You're challenging the defense mechanisms people use to stay emotionally comfortable, and this can make them uneasy. This is why, despite your good intentions, you may have been labeled as too intense, negative, or difficult, but in reality, you're practicing a courageous kind of clarity that many are not yet ready to face. Jung made a powerful discovery about people like you. He believed that individuals with this kind of insight possess what he called prophetic consciousness, a rare ability to perceive where things are headed before others even sense a shift. You see the signs long before the rest of the world catches up. But this gift isn't without weight. It comes with a responsibility that I'll reveal in the final sign, and it may not be what you expect. Now let's move to sign 3. You've developed fierce independence as psychological survival. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." For you, this process hasn't been optional. It's been necessary. You've learned to accept yourself not because the world encouraged it, but because it was the only way to survive emotionally and mentally. Jung's research showed that people with rare personalities often undergo what he called individuated consciousness earlier in life, and it usually doesn't come from ease. It comes through adversity, moments when you had no choice but to stand on your own. And here's what most people don't realize, what even many therapists miss. Your independence isn't a mask. It's not a reaction to pain. It's an achievement, a milestone. Yet society tends to view this independence as a problem. People may say you're too guarded, too self-sufficient, too closed off. But here's why that's dangerous. Because you've learned, often through heartbreak, that relying on others for self-worth is like walking on emotional quicksand. So you built yourself. You got up, sometimes from the ground up, and forged an identity that couldn't be taken away by anyone's judgment or rejection. And that process? Jung called it individuation, the journey toward becoming psychologically whole. Most people never complete this journey because it demands something most fear, confronting the shadow self, all the traits, desires, and wounds they've been taught to deny or suppress. You've stared into those shadows and emerged more whole because of it. But this wholeness comes with its own challenges. Your independence, though hard-earned, tends to attract people who want to possess it and repel those who feel threatened by it. You identified a repeating pattern in how deeply individuated personalities experience relationships, and understanding this pattern can shift everything. Because here's the truth. You don't need a relationship to feel complete. You're not looking for someone to fill a void. You've done the difficult work of filling it yourself. This means when you enter into relationships, you're choosing from strength, not desperation. You don't need someone to complete you because you've done the psychological work of becoming complete. This means you don't seek relationships from desperation, you seek them from choice. You don't want someone to save you. You want someone to stand beside you as you both continue growing. That distinction may sound small, but it's everything. It reflects the maturity of someone who's done the inner work, who's walked through the fire of self-discovery and come out whole, not perfect, but rooted. Carl Jung discovered something profound about people who achieve this kind of genuine independence. They become powerful, energetic magnets. On one hand, they attract deeply authentic love, the kind that honors their freedom. But on the other hand, they also attract people who feel threatened by their strength and want to control or contain it. The challenge isn't in being open, it's in being discerning. The key lies in knowing how to recognize the difference between support and manipulation. And in sign number 7, I'll show you Jung's method for doing just that. For now, let's talk about something equally important: your relationship with solitude. Your solitude isn't loneliness, it's sanctuary. It's the sacred space where all the noise from the world falls away, where you return to your essence. It's where you remember who you are beneath all the roles, labels, and expectations. And that self-acknowledge, according to Jung, is not just comforting. It's foundational. It's the very root of psychological health and long-term stability. Sign 4. You possess intuitive awareness that borders on psychic. Carl Jung changed the landscape of psychology when he argued that intuition wasn't mystical fluff, but a legitimate psychological function. He wrote, "Intuition is perception by the unconscious that brings forth ideas, images, possibilities, ways out of a blocked situation, by a process that is mostly unconscious. In simpler terms, your mind gathers and processes subtle information that never passes through conscious awareness, but still leads you to accurate insights." Here's what Jung understood that modern neuroscience is only beginning to confirm. Some people's nervous systems are wired differently. You don't just pick up information through logic or the 5 senses. You register patterns that others miss completely: energy shifts, inconsistencies, emotional subtext. But this gift comes with a weight. You don't just observe people, you read them. You notice the tiny things, the way someone's tone doesn't match their words, the flicker in their expression, the hesitation in their voice. Jung would have recognized this as a sign of active imagination, a psychological mechanism that allows certain individuals to perceive beyond the obvious and access deeper, often unconscious truths. When someone says they're fine, but everything about their body language screams the opposite, you feel it instantly. When the energy in a room shifts even slightly, you're the first to pick up on it. This isn't paranoia. This is psychological sensitivity, functioning at a rare and finely tuned level. But here comes Jung's important warning. If you don't learn how to protect this sensitivity, it will consume you. He identified a specific technique that allows intuitive people to remain aware without being emotionally hijacked by other people's chaos. Without this skill, people like you tend to fall into the role of unconscious therapist, doing emotional labor for everyone around you without even realizing it. You become the person who regulates tense conversations, eases discomfort in groups, carries the hidden pain others aren't ready to face. Not because you want to, but because you can't not see it. Jung made a startling discovery here. Highly intuitive individuals often get so good at understanding others that they forget to check in with themselves. You become externally oriented, always scanning for tension, subtle changes, emotional patterns, while your own feelings go unacknowledged, unspoken, unmet. And that's dangerous, because over time you start to drift from your own emotional center. But Jung found something remarkable in his work with highly intuitive people. He discovered that once they learned how to anchor themselves with healthy boundaries, this sensitivity didn't need to be a burden. It could become a superpower. The secret, he said, lies in mastering something called psychological boundaries, and I'll explain that technique in just a moment. Sign 5. You crave meaning over social acceptance. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what happens when being true to yourself means rejecting everything that society tells you to want? For some people, this creates discomfort, but for others, like you, it creates a crisis if ignored. Jung discovered that certain rare personality types are psychologically incapable of living inauthentic lives for long. The soul simply won't allow it. Here's what Jung realized about people like you. You don't choose depth over popularity because you think it's noble. You do it because your psyche demands it. Anything else feels hollow. But this inner drive creates a particular type of psychological conflict, one that can be emotionally devastating, unless you understand what's truly happening. You've probably tried, at some point, to conform, to follow the script, to say the right things, wear the right smile, and play the part others expected. Maybe you even convinced yourself for a time that surface-level acceptance would be enough. Maybe you followed the script, said the right things, played the expected role. But Jung would have recognized the symptoms immediately. That gnawing emptiness that lingers beneath the surface, that haunting feeling that you're betraying something essential inside yourself, that quiet, unspoken desperation, hidden beneath applause, approval, or success. According to Carl Jung, when you live in conflict with your true psychological type, the damage isn't just emotional, it's existential. You don't merely feel uncomfortable. You begin to develop what Jung called neurotic symptoms. Your psyche doesn't just endure inauthenticity. It rebels against it, sometimes silently, sometimes violently, but always inevitably. And here's the disturbing truth Jung uncovered. Most people will never experience true meaning in their lives, not because they lack the capacity, but because they fear social rejection more than they desire authenticity. But you face a very different kind of struggle, a more difficult, but ultimately more rewarding one, because your system simply doesn't allow you to pretend that shallow goals matter. You can't fake excitement over things that feel hollow. You can't tolerate empty achievements or transactional praise. Your inner compass constantly pulls you toward truth, even when it costs you comfort. You can't build relationships based on convenience rather than connection. Your psychological makeup won't allow it. And this is why, more often than not, you may feel like a stranger in your own culture, as if the world around you is speaking a language that no longer makes sense. But Jung found something extraordinary in individuals who are unwilling to live without meaning. He called them evolutionary catalysts. These are the people who disrupt patterns, who push against comfort zones, not to rebel, but to invite truth. When you choose real connection over surface harmony, you're not just changing your life, you're unconsciously inviting others to do the same. When you ask the hard questions others avoid, you hold open a mirror. When you live by your values instead of your fears, you give quiet permission for others to rise. But here's Jung's most powerful insight about meaning-driven people. Your role doesn't stop at personal fulfillment. It's not just about finding peace within yourself. It's about recognizing that your clarity, your courage, your refusal to settle has psychological weight. You carry a responsibility, not in a burdensome way, but in a deeply purposeful one. And I'll reveal what that responsibility is in the final sign, and it might change how you see your entire life purpose. Now let's move to sign 6. You've outgrown people and environments that once fit. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." But what happens when you refuse to carry that tragedy forward? What happens when you decide to break the cycle and live fully? Jung discovered something profound about psychological growth. It often begins in solitude, and while growth sounds empowering, there's a hidden cost that no one talks about: grief. Not for failure, but for transformation. There's a specific kind of sadness that comes from realizing you've outgrown the people, places, and roles that once defined you. You begin to see that those who once knew you may no longer understand who you are now. Not because you've become distant or arrogant, but because you've let go of layers that no longer belong to you. Jung called this painful but necessary process psychological death and rebirth. What most people don't understand about outgrowing relationships is that it's not a conscious decision you make. It's the natural consequence of becoming more authentic. But here's the beauty. Jung identified a way to walk this path without resentment. A way to evolve without dishonoring your past. The truth is, the people who knew you during your most compromising moments, when you were hiding parts of yourself to belong, remember that version of you. It felt safer, more predictable, easier for them to manage. And sometimes they'll want that version of you back. But you can't go back. You've changed, not in ego, but in essence. Jung understood that psychological evolution is irreversible. Once your eyes have opened, they cannot unsee. Once you've experienced what it feels like to live in alignment with your truth, you simply can't return to unconscious conformity. And that leads to something Jung described as the dark night of the soul, a period of profound existential loneliness. You begin to see that your path is unique, that your inner voice no longer echoes in familiar places. This isn't the kind of loneliness that comes from being alone. It's the deeper ache of no longer fitting where you once belonged. This isn't ordinary loneliness, it's existential isolation. You realize that authenticity can cost you almost everything familiar. But Jung made a beautiful discovery about those who stay committed to the journey. He found that people who move through this dark night, who hold to their truth even when it feels isolating, eventually begin to attract relationships of extraordinary depth and soul-level authenticity. The key is understanding his concept of psychological resonance, how authentic people find each other. It's not about coincidence, it's not about effort or charm. It's about something far more subtle, the vibrational match between souls who have stopped pretending. When you stop performing and start simply being, when you stop shrinking and begin expanding into your full truth, when you stop apologizing for your depth and start owning it with quiet confidence, a powerful shift takes place, not just within you, but in the entire field of your relationship. This leads us to sign 7. You offer profound presence in a distracted world. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But what if you are the kind of person who brings about transformation, not through advice, not through action, but simply by being deeply present? Jung identified a rare and precious quality, something he called psychological holding space. It's the capacity to create an emotional and psychological container where others feel safe enough to be real. If you have this gift, you probably already know how much it takes from you. But what you may not fully grasp is how rare and valuable it truly is. When someone speaks to you, they feel seen, not just heard. You don't simply absorb their words. You read their pauses, their energy, the hidden meanings behind their tone. You don't rush to fix. You don't interrupt with easy answers. You offer something far more powerful: deep witnessing. You create a kind of sacred space where judgment fades and truth can finally emerge. Jung believed this level of presence is not just a social skill. It is a form of psychological healing. In your presence, people remember what it feels like to be fully human, messy, emotional, layered, and still worthy of compassion. You remind them that they don't have to hide their contradictions, that being seen doesn't have to mean being judged. But here's the crucial insight Jung uncovered about people like you. This gift, if given without boundaries, can become a source of deep exhaustion. Jung observed that many with this capacity end up drained, not because they care too much, but because they never learned when and how to protect that caring. He spoke of the need for psychological boundaries, not to harden the heart, but to keep it sustainable. You've probably found yourself playing the role of the unofficial therapist, the emotional anchor, the safe harbor. People trust you with their pain, and while this makes you invaluable, it can also make you invisible. You become so focused on holding space for others that you forget to ask for space in return. You might suppress your own needs just to avoid adding weight to someone else's burdens. Jung discovered something essential about highly empathetic individuals. They often develop what he called helper syndrome, a pattern of unconscious self-sacrifice that slowly erodes their well-being. The issue isn't your capacity to care, it's the absence of discernment. The real work, Jung taught, is not to stop caring or close your heart. It's to refine your ability to discern, to recognize who has earned access to your emotional presence, and more importantly, who is capable of giving back. When Jung worked with individuals who had a naturally therapeutic presence, he found they needed to master a specific relational skill that completely shifted how they connected with others. I'll share that skill in the final sign because it holds the key to maintaining your emotional gifts without losing yourself in the process. Now, let's move to sign 8. You sense a larger purpose that you can't yet define. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." If you've ever felt that persistent sense that you're meant for something more, something beyond the ordinary rhythms of daily life, you're not imagining it. Jung would have recognized this as the signal of what he called the transcendent function. It's the psyche's drive toward individuation and purpose, the inner call to align your outer life with your deepest truth. Jung made a remarkable observation. People who feel this kind of undefined but urgent sense of calling are not delusional or grandiose. They're not chasing illusions. They're responding to what he called archetypal calling, the psychological invitation to become not just functional, but whole. But here's where it gets tricky. That calling, if misunderstood, can become distorted. Instead of inspiring you, it can lead to restlessness, confusion, or even despair if you don't know how to work with it. And you've likely felt it, that inner nudge, that quiet insistence. You have something to contribute, something to build, something to say. It may not be clearly defined yet. It may not fit any socially approved template, but it's there, and you feel it, unshakably. Jung called this inner urgency creative potential seeking expression. It's not about fame, it's not about external validation. It's about alignment, the psychological necessity of living in harmony with your innermost nature. This isn't about fame or recognition, it's about alignment, the psychological necessity of living in harmony with your deepest nature. Jung found that people who ignore this calling often develop what he termed neurotic symptoms. These aren't just passing moods, they're deep, persistent signs that the soul is in conflict with its own truth. Anxiety, depression, a haunting sense of meaninglessness. These emerge when the psyche knows it has a purpose but is prevented from living it. Jung believed that the cost of avoiding your deeper calling isn't just emotional discomfort, it's psychological fragmentation. But here is perhaps Jung's most profound insight about purpose-driven individuals. Your calling is not only personal, it is transpersonal. You're not just here to fulfill yourself. You're not just here to chase a dream or follow a passion. You're here for something larger, something that serves not only your own evolution, but the evolution of collective human awareness. You're here to serve the evolution of consciousness itself. According to Jung, individuals with rare and differentiated personalities, like yours, are bridges. Bridges between the unconscious and the conscious realms of human experience. Through your emotional depth, your relentless questioning, and your refusal to accept shallow answers, you help bring unconscious truth into the light. You help humanity grow, not by force, but by example. This is why you can't settle for the ordinary. This is why small talk feels suffocating. This is why surface-level friendships leave you feeling emptier than being alone. You would rather walk alone in your truth than stand with a crowd in pretense. Your psyche knows that your presence here has purpose, and that purpose requires a commitment to authenticity, depth, and courage. But Jung also issued a powerful warning. When you begin to sense the magnitude of your calling, it can trigger ego inflation, a subtle belief that your gifts make you superior. And this is where maturity begins. The key, Jung said, is learning to hold both humility and power at once, understanding that you are special, but not above others. You are unique, but still connected. You carry a rare responsibility, but not a license to elevate yourself above those still finding their path. Carl Jung spent his entire career studying personalities like yours. He referred to these individuals as the differentiated ones, people who had developed an inner psychological complexity that allowed them to see, feel, and interpret life at a level most people never even glimpse. If even half of the signs in this message resonated with you, you're not simply different. You're part of what Jung called the leading edge of human consciousness. You are not here to fit in. You're here to guide, to illuminate, to live as proof that depth and truth are not liabilities, but necessities. You are one of the rare souls pushing humanity forward toward greater awareness, deeper truth, and more authentic human connection. Yes, it's isolating at times. Yes, it will often be misunderstood. And yes, it demands more courage than most people will ever be asked to summon. But Jung believed that people like you are absolutely essential for humanity's psychological and spiritual evolution. Your sensitivity isn't a weakness, it's a superpower. Your intensity isn't too much, it's exactly what this world has been waiting for. And your refusal to settle for mediocrity? That's not defiance, it's bravery. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And that's exactly what you are learning to do. Not perfectly, not all at once, but courageously, piece by piece. And in doing so, you give silent permission for others to begin doing the same. Drop a comment below and tell me which of these signs felt most true to you. Share this with someone who needs to remember their own psychological rarity. And be sure to subscribe to The Soul of a Scientist, because we're just beginning to explore the incredible depths of what makes you extraordinary. Remember, you're not too much. The world has just been too little. And Jung knew people like you are the ones who changed that.